Have you ever felt like your world was falling apart, but somehow, it wasn't a breakdown, it was something deeper waking up? In this video, you're going to discover why most people never survive their spiritual awakening, and it's not for the reasons you think. We'll walk through the hidden stages of awakening, the ego death that few dare to face, and how shadow work reveals parts of you that were never truly lost, only forgotten. Drawing from the insights of Carl Jung and the timeless path of the dark night of the soul, this journey is not just philosophical. It's raw, emotional, and deeply personal. By the end, you'll recognize the signs of awakening within your own life and understand why some souls get stuck, while others rise. Are you currently experiencing strange emotional shifts, intense dreams, or questioning everything you once believed? That's not random. That's consciousness expansion in real time. But surviving this process takes more than meditation or self-help mantras. It takes surrender. It takes inner fire. And above all, it takes clarity. Backhand index pointing right, stick with me to the end of this video. I'll reveal what most people miss about the awakening process and why embracing your shadow may be the only way to access your higher self. And if you're walking this path, you're not alone. Comment below with what you're going through right now. Someone else may need to hear your truth. Don't forget to subscribe if this resonates. This is where you come to make the darkness conscious and survive it. Most people think a spiritual awakening is beautiful. They imagine peaceful meditations, divine messages, and a newfound sense of bliss. But the truth? It often begins with your entire world crumbling. What you once believed to be real about yourself, others, even God, starts to collapse. This isn't poetic suffering. It's raw disorientation. You wake up and suddenly realize nothing feels familiar anymore. It's like your soul is screaming, but your ego is trying to plug its ears. You're not losing your mind. You're losing your illusion. And for many, that's terrifying. Think about when someone changes their diet. At first, the detox hurts. Headaches, fatigue, cravings, they feel worse before they feel better. Awakening is the same. Your spirit is detoxing years, maybe lifetimes, of programming. Everything that doesn't align with your soul's truth starts falling away. You might lose friends, feel misunderstood. Even your own reflection might feel unfamiliar. And yet, beneath the discomfort, there's something undeniable, a presence, a whisper, a call to go deeper, even when everything in you wants to retreat. One woman I mentored once told me she felt like she was dying in slow motion. She wasn't suicidal, she was awakening. Her job felt meaningless. Her conversations felt fake. Even her goals felt like they belonged to someone else. That's what happens when your false self begins to dissolve. It's not depression. It's deconstruction. The old self was built on survival, approval, and external validation. Now that scaffolding is falling, and the soul, raw and tender, is learning to walk without masks. That's why it hurts. It's birth, not death. Carl Jung called it making the darkness conscious. And that's exactly what's happening here. The parts of you you've ignored, your pain, your fear, your shadow, they're not enemies. They're messengers. But most people run. They chase pleasure, numb with distractions, or label the process as a crisis, a breakdown, something to medicate away. But those who dare to stay, those who dare to sit in the discomfort, begin to see the truth. Awakening isn't glamorous. It's humbling, and it demands everything. Let's bring it down to earth. Imagine a man in his late 40s, successful on paper but empty inside. One day, during a business meeting, he has a sudden panic attack. Not because of the pressure, but because his soul finally said, enough. He goes home, sits in his car, and cries for the first time in 20 years. That was his moment. The beginning. No retreat. Just raw awakening. It didn't look spiritual, but it was the most sacred moment of his life. That's how it begins. Inconvenient, silent, irreversible. You won't find this explained in a standard psychology book. And yet, those experiencing it often end up in therapy, misdiagnosed or misunderstood. Some even think they're having a nervous breakdown. But if a therapist knows Jungian psychology, They might recognize the symptoms: ego fragmentation, spiritual crisis, existential disorientation. The good ones will say, "You're not sick. You're shedding." And that single sentence can save a life. Because the awakening process doesn't destroy you. It breaks what you're not, to reveal what you are. Now here's what they never tell you. Awakening doesn't happen in stages like school. It's not linear. It loops, cycles, repeats. Some days you feel invincible. Other days you question everything. You'll think you've healed, and then the shadow returns. But that's not failure, it's refinement. You're being sculpted from the inside out. Your spirit is building strength not through escape, but through integration. And the more you resist, the more intense it becomes. It's not punishment, it's preparation. And yet, the most painful part isn't the collapse, it's what comes next. The space between who you were and who you're becoming. The void. That limbo. That's where most souls give up. They reach for the old life. The fake safety. The shallow version of success. But what if, just beyond that darkness, something extraordinary was waiting? The moment the false self begins to collapse, life starts to feel like a paradox. You know something deep is shifting, but nothing on the outside seems to make sense anymore. Your old dreams no longer excite you. Conversations that once felt comfortable now sound hollow. You might even question your values, your faith, your entire identity. This is the unraveling of the persona, the version of you built to survive, not to thrive. And the soul? It's no longer satisfied with borrowed beliefs. It's craving something real. But first, the mask must fall. The false self is a master of disguise. It wears ambition like armor, perfection like a costume, and people-pleasing like a shield. You might have worn it so long that you forgot what your real face looks like. But the awakening process strips that layer away. Not cruelly, but completely. You may find yourself standing in front of the mirror, wondering, who am I without my titles, my roles, my performance? That's not a breakdown. That's ego death in its purest form. The loss of what is false creates space for what is eternal. In the middle of this collapse, most people search desperately for something to hold on to. They may run back to old relationships, return to numbing habits, or obsessively seek answers in books or podcasts. But the truth is, no external solution can rescue you from an internal awakening. Only inner stillness can guide you through. This is where shadow work begins, not as a trendy term, but as a daily confrontation with everything you once denied. The anger, the shame, the grief, you meet it all face to face. Let's bring this to real life. Picture a woman who spent 20 years building a successful coaching business. Outwardly, she was confident, but inside, she felt like an imposter. One night, after yet another sleepless evening filled with anxiety, she deleted her website. She said, "I can't sell a version of me that I no longer believe in." That was the collapse. Not a failure, but an awakening. And in that void, she began to hear the voice she had silenced for decades. The one that said, "Come back home." This collapse doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're brave enough to let go of what was never truly you. Carl Jung believed the persona was necessary, but dangerous when mistaken for the self. And that's exactly what happens to most people. They confuse the role with the reality. But if you can sit with the silence, if you can survive the space where nothing feels stable, then something extraordinary begins to form. Not instantly, not loudly, but deeply, and this, my friend, is where most people get stuck. The space between the collapse and the transformation is the most dangerous. It's like standing on the edge of two worlds, one falling apart, the other not yet formed. And in that tension, many souls freeze. Why? Because the ego hates uncertainty. It will do anything to pull you back into the familiar, even if that familiar is suffering. This is where people get stuck, not because they're weak, but because they've never been taught how to walk through spiritual fire. And let's be honest, most cultures reward masks, not truth. The first trap is spiritual bypassing. It looks enlightened, but it's a disguise. People skip the pain by repeating affirmations, chasing light, or numbing with rituals that never touch the real wound. They avoid the dark night of the soul by clinging to the illusion of being high vibe. But without shadow work, nothing sticks. One man I knew journaled and meditated daily, but refused to feel his anger. Years later, he still felt stuck, because he was using spirituality to avoid his humanity. True transformation requires full contact with the raw, messy emotions we fear most. The second trap is addiction to answers. When someone's soul is awakening, they often binge-watch content, read dozens of books, and consult endless coaches or gurus. Information becomes a drug, but no amount of learning replaces inner knowing. At some point, you have to sit with the silence. Feel the unknown. Let the answers come from your higher self, not a stranger's voice. This is when consciousness expansion begins, not from the mind, but from the surrender of it. The deepest truths are whispered, not shouted. The third trap? Isolation. When life no longer makes sense, people tend to withdraw. They feel misunderstood. They fear judgment. But alone in the shadows, doubts grow louder. The ego thrives in isolation. That's why support matters. Not shallow positivity, but deep, honest connection. The kind where someone says, "I've been there too." Joining circles of awakening souls, or even sharing anonymously online, can be a lifeline. One real story, one shared moment, can save someone from disappearing into spiritual despair. And here's the twist: most people don't even realize they're stuck. The ego adapts, rebuilds a more spiritual version of the old identity, and calls it growth. But the inner world stays stagnant. If you've been on this path for years and still feel like you're circling the same wounds, you're not alone. You may be standing at a spiritual threshold, waiting. But what if the key to the next level isn't more knowledge, but something ancient, hidden, and radically uncomfortable? Something miraculous happens when you stop running. When you finally turn around and face the very part of yourself you feared the most, you begin to understand. The shadow was never your enemy. It was your guide. Carl Jung taught that true enlightenment doesn't come from imagining light. It comes from making the darkness conscious. And in that moment of surrender, the spiritual transformation begins. You realize the emotions you rejected, your jealousy, your rage, your sorrow, aren't flaws. They're sacred signals. The parts of you buried in shame are actually full of wisdom. Rebirth doesn't look the way movies show it. It doesn't come wrapped in fireworks or angelic music. Sometimes, it looks like a breakdown in your car, a panic attack in a grocery store, a deep breath in the middle of an argument, where for the first time, you don't defend yourself. These ordinary moments become extraordinary when seen through awakened eyes. They're not detours, they're initiations. One man I spoke with said he began to cry while washing dishes. That moment of grief cracked him open. Not because of what was lost, but because of what was finally seen. The shadow teaches you to see your life through a new lens. You no longer run from discomfort, you study it. You ask it questions. You treat it like a mentor. That's when inner healing begins, not by fixing yourself, but by listening to what your wounds are trying to say. You begin to understand that your trauma shaped your armor, but your soul was never broken. The deeper you go, the more paradox you find. Pain becomes your teacher. Grief becomes grace. And in that mystery, the awakening journey begins to bloom. Imagine this. A woman who spent years pretending to be strong finally admits, "I'm tired." She writes it in her journal, and then says it out loud for the first time. That one sentence shatters a lifetime of pretending. She starts therapy, quits the job that drained her, takes daily walks with no phone. She's not chasing enlightenment. She's choosing wholeness. And in doing so, she discovers her true self was never hidden. It was waiting beneath the roles she thought she had to play. That's rebirth. That's soul awakening. But don't be fooled. The shadow doesn't disappear. It walks with you, not as a threat, but as a mirror. It shows up in your relationships, your choices, your doubts. Every time you choose honesty over image, courage over control, or presence over perfection, you integrate another piece of your power. This is what most people miss. The spiritual ego wants to ascend, but the awakened soul chooses to descend, to root, to feel, to live fully human. And this choice, this sacred descent, is what unlocks the next stage. After the collapse, the confusion, and the confrontation with the shadow, what remains is silence. But not the kind of silence that feels empty. It's a silence that feels full, pregnant with potential. This is the moment when true integration begins. You no longer chase the light or fear the dark. Instead, you walk with both. You recognize that your awakening was never about escaping the world. It was about entering it with new eyes. You're not floating above your humanity. You're anchored inside it. This is where spiritual growth becomes real. Integration doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds slowly, like seasons shifting. You may wake up feeling deeply connected one day and lost the next. That's normal. The awakened life is not a straight path. It's a spiral. You revisit wounds from new levels of wisdom. You meet your shadow again, but now you speak its language. You show up to relationships more grounded, more honest. The world may not change, but your way of being in it does. And that changes everything. Let's make it real. Picture a man who used to react with rage every time he felt disrespected. Now he pauses. Not because he suppresses the emotion, but because he's integrated it. He can feel anger without becoming it. That's the fruit of consciousness expansion. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but choice. This is what it means to walk the path, not talk it. And in these small, daily moments, the awakened self becomes embodied. There's also a return to simplicity. After the chaos, the mystical downloads, and the shadow dives, you begin to crave stillness. You find beauty in mundane things. A quiet meal, a long walk, a deep conversation. You no longer need signs or synchronicities to feel connected. You are the connection. And perhaps for the first time, you understand what it means to be whole. Not because you're finished, but because you've stopped resisting the unfinished parts. This is what Carl Jung meant by individuation, the sacred dance between soul and self. And here's the truth most people never realize. Spiritual awakening isn't a one-time event. It's a lifelong practice of becoming real, becoming whole, and becoming free. But only if you're willing to walk it consciously, with courage. So if you've made it this far in the journey, I'll ask you one thing. Are you ready to live from your soul, even when the world around you doesn't understand it? So now you know. The spiritual awakening isn't soft. It isn't sweet. And it doesn't come to upgrade your life. It comes to strip away everything that isn't your soul. That's why most people don't survive it, not because it's fatal, but because it demands a death. The death of the ego. The death of control. The death of who you thought you had to be. But here's the beautiful paradox. What dies isn't real. And what remains is sacred. If you're feeling like you've lost your footing, like nothing makes sense anymore, take a breath. That's exactly where awakening begins. Not in clarity, but in the chaos before it. Not in certainty, but in the silent courage to stay awake when everything inside you wants to go back to sleep. Most people run, but the chosen few stay. They integrate. They listen. They walk through the fire and come out whole, not perfect, but real. And if you've watched this far, maybe that's who you are too. So don't keep this to yourself. Comment below. Tell me which part of this journey you're in. You never know who needs to hear your voice today. And if this message resonated, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what's next. We're walking this path together. Because awakening isn't a destination. It's the art of becoming whole over and over again.